All right, let's go to padded satin stitch. Now I'm just going to take my friction pen here and I'm going to draw a circle just so we have a path to follow. Okay, so satin stitch, it's very easy for the edges around your shape to look jagged. So to help with that, we do split stitch around the design line first. All right, so you're just, and you can do, actually you can do stem stitch around, you can do chain, well I wouldn't do chain stitch because it's kind of fat in places and narrow in places. And I wouldn't do back stitch because back stitch can get out of line a little easier. Chain or split stitch and stem stitch tend to be a smoother line. So I'm just going to get this in place actually, and then I will come back to you. So when we come back in this video, this split stitch circle will be complete and we'll be ready to start the padding. All right, so we have our split stitch ring, and we're going to make this a padded satin stitch. If it's just regular satin stitch, we're just going to complete it with a layer of satin stitch right now. But we're going to do padded satin stitch, which means we're going to put stitches in the middle of the circle, going one way, then another way, then another way, and we're going to keep going as long as we want until we have a nice floofy center, and then we'll finish it by putting the satin stitch over the top. So when you start this, you want to think about which way you want your top layer of satin stitches to go. So if I want my top layer of satin stitches to go this way, I'm going to make sure I end with padding stitches going this way, because if you do your padding stitches always in the same direction, they're just going to sink into each other, and you don't want that. So I'm going to start going horizontal because I know how many layers I want. So I'm just going to, inside the split stitch line, start making straight. I always start with a center stitch and then I go out from there. And the reason I do, it's just a habit, but it's a good habit to have because you don't want your stitches to get crooked and get off. And if you have a center line going the straightest way, then you, okay. So I've got 3 padded stitches going that way. Now I'm going to do the next layer of padding across those. By now you're probably seeing what I mean about the fact that now see they can't sink into each other because they're crisscrossing each other. Oops. So they can't sink in. So that's layer 2, and we're going to do layer 3, going that way. And it's okay that this looks like a little bit of a hot mess because none of this is going to show. What you care about is neatness and padding, in as much as you can be neat with something like this. The appearance doesn't have to be neat. So that's just not sticking up enough for me, so I think I'm going to go another set of layers. One more set of layers. Now I would not stop my padding going this direction because this is the direction I want my satin stitches to go, and my satin stitches will just sink into these padding stitches. And we don't want that. So one last layer. Come on, there we go. One last layer of padding stitches here. It's looking very chunky, which is what I like. Well, in this instance, it's what I like. Sometimes you might choose not to make it so chunky, and sometimes you might choose to make it more chunky. So now I'm ready for my final layer of satin stitch. This outline here of split stitch is going to be my guide. So I'm going to bring the needle up in the middle. You can do bottom or top, it doesn't matter, but do the middle, and you're going to place a guideline stitch going across. Now I have 2 layers of thread here, so I want to make sure my 2 layers are flat next to each other, parallel. They're not going to lay down one on top of another. But I'm going to go, here's what I do when I want to make sure it's perfect. I lay it down and I look like I don't want that way, I don't want that way, I want to go that way, right? So it's right about there. And then I just put my needle in and I angle it just a little bit angle that way, okay? And voila. Are we laying flat? Yes, we are. Okay, so that's my first satin stitch. I'm going to lay another one right next to it. Angle it a little bit and go under. This little hoop is going to drive me crazy for this example. There we go. So when you start with that guide stitch in the middle, what you're doing is you're giving yourself a guide to keep straight for half of your stitch, or half of your piece that you're stitching satin stitch on, so that all the rest of the stitches, you see how they're laying nice and flat. And this can be sometimes an exercise in patience. It's okay if you mutter sweary words while you're doing this. It's really okay. Well, maybe not around the kids, but otherwise. Okay. Oops. And there you go. See how nice and smooth and satin that's looking right there? I'm loving this. Back up to the bottom. Go right there, angle that. The reason we angle it is because it gives us a little bit more of a smooth edge. And see, even this is not perfect. If I was doing this for real, I would be using a magnifier, because I swear I'm going to be blind in another 5 years. Oops. Come here, you. There we go. Okay, so one more stitch I think ought to do it, and I ought to be pretty smooth looking. There we go. Okay, so then you just finish the other half same way. And when you're doing things like this, especially if it's a flower, if you aren't happy, if you feel like this is still too jagged, you can go ahead and do a border around that with a stem stitch or a split stitch or whatever you want to sort of even out, you know, and cover up your jagged edges. But as you practice and you keep going, you will be much better at satin stitch, and soon you'll be a needlework ninja. No one will be able to do a better satin stitch than you. So it just requires a little bit of patience with yourself, which I know sometimes we're not very good at being patient with ourselves. We're patient with everybody else, but not ourselves. So this is a good lesson for all of us to be nice to ourselves. And that is padded satin stitch. I'm not going to finish the rest of this. I know you guys have got it down and you're ready to practice. So let's go.